Hello and welcome back to Marine for TCG. My name is Joe, drink of the day is a Copperberg mixed fruit, and OP15 is right around the corner. And not only does this set contain 7 brand new leaders and a whole bunch of buffs to older leaders, we're also getting the second half and probably the more impactful half of EBO4. In addition to that, we've had a new ban list with the removal of Pudding and the freeing of both Jinbei and Raigo. And we've also got rotations to talk about, so a lot to discuss here. In this video, I'm going to be showing you lists for all of the new decks that have been brought out in this set, most of the decks that are being buffed by this set, and also 1 or 2 decks that are being heavily nerfed or buffed by rotation. I will not be covering decks that are basically unchanged from last format. Decks like Emu. If you want to look at an Emu list, you can look at any list from the past year and they'll probably be fine. Anyway, starting straight off with OP15, I think the most hyped deck as we look into this format is Purple Enel. Purple Enel is a deck that sort of plays a little bit similarly to Red Rayleigh, in that you have a ton of events with really tricky effects, and you're also very aggressive. All the 1-cost priests, regenerating you card value, gives you a crazy amount of draw with this deck, and the characters you get to play out are just unfair at times. Having tested this a little bit more now, I do think the Holly is a big difference maker in a lot of games. When the Enel players, they find that Ohm Holly combo, or even just the Holly, getting a huge double attack off, especially into 4 life leaders, feels absolutely brutal. So for a list that I would recommend starting with this list here. Remember what side to point at. That does include the Holly. I think Rosinante and Law is also another inclusion that you could look to think about, but I'm not sure that it's just better than the Enels. The fact that the Rosinante and Law is removable is a major downside. Now, Enel's rival from the Sky Island, Monkey D. Luffy, yes again, he's in another set. What a surprise. I wonder when we'll get another set without Luffy. Obviously, they couldn't jam him in the Warlord set. They managed to get Law in there, but yeah, I wonder when the next set without Luffy will be. I'm not holding my breath. Anyway, a yellow Luffy has a very weird leader effect where you can just sort of use your life, not only as a resource to both draw cards and protect yourself, but also to protect your guys. It's like Giga anti-removal. You ain't playing removal into yellow Luffy, that's for sure. And this way, you're going to be able to build a board pretty reliably, and I think healing cards are going to be some of the best cards that you can put in this deck. And we'll go over a lot more yellow decks later, once we get to the decks buffed by this set. But yeah, you're going to see a lot of this Borsalino card. He's quite good. He's a little bit good. I do think this combo is going to get touched probably at some point in the future. I don't think this is terribly healthy for the game. But for now, it's here to stay, and yellow Sky Luffy is definitely one of the best yellow decks as we look into this format. And if you want to try him out, I'd recommend starting off with a list a little bit like this. There's plenty of things you can change in a lot of these leaders, but this is a nice, stable starting point. The spiritual successor to Mono Red Ace from OP15, that's the one, and quite thematic really, is Lucci. Lucci can use their events both offensively and defensively with their leader effect, and is also able to draw extra cards throughout the game. This really helps because you are a 4-life leader, and 4-life leaders notoriously can struggle for resources. So being able to draw effectively an extra card every turn, along with the extra card draw you get from cards like Cavendish, and go ahead and use them if you are playing that card, really do help you get towards the one card that this deck is based all around. 7-cost Sabo. If you can chain this card with the 7-cost Fire Fist, that combo is just very, very brutal. You get to nullify your opponent's threats, make these enormous blockers, and then they can start swinging for 9k, which is huge. This deck does sort of sometimes stutter a bit when you either whiff a 7-cost Sabo in your chain, or if your opponent is able to remove your Sabos, but Lucci is absolutely a serious meta contender, and I would be starting with a list a little bit like this one. You will see slightly different lists. What searches and 2Ks you play does vary quite a bit, and some of the events as well, but for my money, I'm quite enjoying the Bello Betty at the minute. A deck that I have very little experience actually playing, but I've played into a fair amount of times now, and I have played it as well a few times myself, is Blue Rebecca. I had very little hope for this deck when it was first revealed, but I'm pleased to say I've been proven at least somewhat wrong. Abster TCG has been playing this deck a little bit, so if you want to see some gameplay with this leader, make sure you check out Abster. And this is very, very similar to one of his builds from his most recent Rebecca video. This deck's able to be very aggressive and makes excellent use of some of the older cards like the Jinbei especially, because you're able to trash cards from your hand quite so easily with this deck. So I do think Rebecca is probably not going to be a meta contender, but she's at least rogue and a lot better than I was expecting. Now we move into probably the two most underwhelming decks from the set, and I think Brook has potential. I'm not sure if it's been figured out yet. This is the build that I'm working with at the minute. Brook's all about the combos, getting the big kill combos, and I think there's maybe even room for one of 9-cost Zoro in here. But my problem with Brook is he's very weak to removal, despite having a good amount of anti-removal that you can choose to play. And just that you don't develop enough board, so it's hard to pressure your opponent to the point where you're able to go, okay, I'm good to go for my combo turn now. Additionally, sometimes you just don't have the resources to last even until your combo turn. Sometimes you will just die. You're a 4-life leader with basically no card draw outside of the Pirate Locking Chopper combo, and it can sometimes feel like your hand is just not quite going far enough. I do think Brook has potential, and if you have any suggestions for how to improve this Brook list, let me know in the comments, but this is a good starting point in my opinion. And the final leader out of OP15 is Mr. Krieg, one of the most insane leader effects we've ever seen, but his package is very, very sort of middling to make up for that. I think they've played it smart. You can't give a leader that with this crazy an effect too crazy a package. But this leader has like no draw, man. It's kind of crazy. You just run out of resources, and you've got to muscle through your opponent before you get to that point. In addition, you're very weak to removal. You can play the Koby, but like reducing your leader to 3k kind of stinks because it kind of undoes your leader effect. So if you have this Koby and they just play like a low effort removal on the Koby, you're forced to either let it go and then suffer whatever else removal they have for that turn, or reduce your leader to 3 and then potentially just get battered. So it's kind of a catch-22. However, when you see your curve of your like Arlong into Geen Morgan or Geen Alvida, and then start spamming those boss monsters, those Kriegs to combat your opponent's board, or the Kuro to just be a nice big defensive threat, this deck can absolutely get the job done. It's just sometimes you feel like you're running out of resources way too fast. And the final new leader for EBO4, and one that has absolutely benefited hugely from the ban list, is Red Yellow Jewelry Bonney. This deck really wants to sit at 1. It reminds me very much of old Enel in that way. And you just want to take down to 1, sit at a 7k lead, and just be like, you ain't gonna kill me. Every turn, either healing or buffing yourself to 9k to increase your defense. And this deck being Egghead, and you can lean into this Egghead package, giving you greater access to the Borsalino Rayquaza combo. In addition, because you want to sit at 1, Kingdom Come Raygo is just giga free. You never have to pay a cost for this. And the fact that your hand can no longer get puddinged and your Luffy can no longer get red rocked, I think is a huge buff for this deck. I don't think we've quite seen this deck's potential because the East has pudding and red rock right up until the start of April. But I do have hopes that Jewelry Bonney could be at least a lot more menacing than she's looked in the East. If you are going to start playing Jewelry Bonney, I've got a video on the channel. It's a little old now, but this is the list that I was playing, and I don't think a ton changes other than I have added in a couple of copies of Raygo. Now in that Bonney list, you'll have seen this card, this new 7-cost Zoro. This card's crazy, and I think there are a number of red decks that do benefit from this quite significantly. One such is Red Green Luffy. He's all about the Straw Hats, and if you are able to build the board of Donry standards, go like Usopp, into a Sanji, into a Zoro, suddenly you're a 7k leader with sort of 3 Dons active from your Usopp and your Sanji. That's quite scary, because that can buff you to sort of 9 3 times, and that alleviates a lot of pressure. You will obviously have to be careful when you swing your Usopps, because he is still just a 5k unit, but the power you're going to get out of this Zoro, I think, has a lot of potential. Also, being red and green, there's certainly the opportunity to look to play power down if you think that's worthwhile. And more importantly, I think you have the opportunity to play stun. In this list that I've shown here, I've gone with Electrical Luna, But if you don't want to go that far all in, you could certainly play I Know You're Strong, and that card is searchable off your Nami searcher, for example. The stun is going to be really nice for the Enel matchup, and maybe even the Lucci matchup. So I do think that Red Green Luffy has certainly some potential in this format going forwards. Red Nami does not rotate because it has a manga, just to catch that one there. And you also gain the 1-cost Laboon, which is quite a nice anti-removal option. Now, a deck that's been very heavily impacted by the rotation and sort of gains, again, the red Zoro from this set is Red Blue Ace. Red Blue Ace lost his 9-beard, but he's got a cheaper replacement. What a time to be alive. In addition, the removal of Red Rock, well, it has somewhat been replaced by Raygo, is going to mean that your new gates are a lot safer. At least if they're getting Raygo'd, that procs your leader effect. Could be worse. In addition, being able to play the Zoro alongside, for example, the 6-cost Uta, is going to let you develop a blocker and go to 8k on the same turn, which is pretty crazy. And I think there are a few room for tech slots in this deck, again, depending on what you expect. This is the list that I'm going to be starting with. I have put in one of the tax beards. I think that could be quite useful into a Enel. And I've also got a couple copies of Honesty Impact for a bit of removal into the Lucci matchup, and potentially into other things too. Now, the final card that benefits from this 7-cost Zoro, yeah, it's a good one, it's a really, really good card, is Red Purple Roger. Now, I was really excited for Red Purple Roger. Try and finally use the 10 costs properly, because the 10 costs has just been notoriously horrible, because it gets Red Rock to every other match. Well, that's not the case anymore. It gets Raygo'd every other match instead. What a time to be alive. In addition, the combo just doesn't work into an L, because typically when you would do your sort of 10 cost, 8 cost, 10 cost, 8 cost chain, your opponent will be at 10 Don by the time you need to play that 8 cost. When to an L, that just doesn't work, because they have 6 Don. So once you play a 10 cost Roger, you can't buff on the following turn, which is a problem. Because obviously 7 cost Zoro is negated and 8 cost Roger doesn't work because you're at 9 and they're at 6 probably. As a result, whilst I think the 10 cost Roger, the purple one I'm talking about, is still a lot better in this format, I think it's more of like a, in certain matchups it's good and sometimes as a closer. So that's why I've only got it at 2 in this list. I think the 7 cost Zoro and the 8 cost Roger are still unfortunately better, and 10 cost Shanks just fits in really nicely alongside them. I do also think the Zoro is kind of strictly better than the 8 cost Roger. Obviously he's not searchable, which is a bit of a bummer, and his stat line is slightly weaker, but having Character Rush seems to give you a nice bit of benefit, and the fact that you can go, for example, Zoro, Uta, and then still have 1 Don for your event, again seems quite compelling. This is the list that I'm going to be starting with when I test some Roger. I'm not sure how good he's going to be in this format, but I think the Zoro and the fact that Roger is the purple one is slightly less vulnerable to removal is at least a reason to try him once again. My boy, my goat, Red Black Koby. Red Black Koby is, you know, I love this deck. This is the build that I've got a video, where is it? I've got a video going up with a build very similar to this relatively soon. So make sure you're subscribed if you want to see that. I think we are unfortunately still forced to play Beckman because of all the yellow going around, but primarily because of Boa. Having your main strategy be I'm going to play board is really good. And this new 6-cost Koby is genuinely very, very crazy for the deck. Gives you insane amount of card draw and makes your 6 Don turn so powerful. But the fact that into Boa, they just punish you so hard for playing board, I think necessitates at least a few copies of Beckman. The 8-cost Mokushigi is also incredibly important. Buffing you to 7 so that you are slightly less weak to the aggro decks is nice if you are not able to play board into them for whatever reason. The strength of Koby in this format, I think, are that Dole is extremely good for reducing the power of things like Lucci, the Saba, I mean, and 6-cost Enels, and also the 4-cost Koby being able to just deck all those little weenie guys, be it the Priests into Enel or the Rebeccas into Lucci. And the card draw this deck has access to now is off the charts, with just sometimes the on-KOs can be a little bit too much to overcome. And the final red deck is Red Sanji. This is definitely much more of a rogue pick, but I think with the addition of the new 7-cost Zeph, this deck at least isn't just going to die to defense, right? You're going to have us be a 7k leader for a lot of the game, as long as you can find this Zeph, which maybe will be easier said than done, but it is what it is. Being able to use other cards like the 4-cost Koby for draw, the Wapol for power down, I think Sanji has a chance. Not necessarily a huge chance, but a chance, and I'm excited to give him a go. I'd recommend a list a little bit like this one if you do want to start trying out Sanji. Now moving on to green, I don't actually have really a lot to talk about because most of the green decks, I don't think they change that much. Green Bonney's going to have to find a different top end. She can't use 10-cost Doflamingo or 8-cost Kid anymore. Mihawk's got to mix up his events, but I don't think any of those are terribly big. But there is one green card that I think is pretty huge in this set, and it's Laboon. You've already seen this in my RG Luffy list, but I also expect both Mihawk and Bonney to use this card. It's so nice for defending your early game plays, especially if you're on more of a 6-cost lore build. Being able to protect those guys, it's so huge, man. And the fact this Laboon only costs 1, whereas Tashigi costs 3, it's going to make it much, much easier to get this Laboon down. And it's also an emergency bounce target for a 6-cost lore, which both Mihawk and Bonney love playing. I would expect to see Laboon in both these decks, probably as a 4-of, so definitely make sure you get your copies. And we can briefly mention the other anti-removal 2Ks here. I think they're all good, they're nice cards to have, and if your deck is one that struggles with removal, having the option to slot these in is just going to be kind of a crutch. They're not made equally though, like the purple one's so free, and like the red and the yellow one are pretty bad. The blue one's pretty bad as well, though you still play that in Lucci, because it's nice and searchable and just a cheap guy. But yeah, I'm definitely not loving these as much as I thought when they were initially revealed, but they're going to have their places in certain decks. And I would definitely pick up a playset of each of these just so you have them. They're not going to be expensive or anything in the future, I wouldn't expect, but they're good cards to have. Now, skipping over purple, because most of the Enel stuff I don't think is that splashable. If you're a Reiju main, I know some people are excited for the 6-cost Enels in Reiju. So if you do have a list of Reiju, let me know in the comments, but I'm going to jump straight into the black straw hat support. And first up is black ST14 Luffy. Now, I've not played this leader yet, but Mr. Nightingale TCG, friend of the channel, has been playing this quite a lot. This is the list from his most recent video. If you want to see some gameplay with this, go check it out. But the new cards you've gained in this deck are primarily the Pirate Docking, the Nami, and the new 7-cost Luffy. The 7-cost Luffy, in theory, can let you boost to 8k, although you do need 20 cards in trash, which is significant. But the Pirate Docking 6, honestly, is potentially better. The fact this lets you go to 6k as soon as you're 6th on turn, because it becomes an 11 cost when it's on your board, is really good. And it generates your value, right? It gets those mills to get you towards that Luffy. And if you've found Chopper, you can bring him back again and then get a bunch more mills, right? If you found Chopper and then you've played him once, then you played the Pirate Docking, brought the Chopper back, that's like 10 cards in the trash already, pretty much. That's not too bad. That's close to your Luffy, and it makes your consistency in the later game a lot better, because you can use those choppers to just bring back Nami, and then use the Nami to give the Luffy rush, and so on and so forth. You also do have access to a bit of spot removal for matchups where that matters. Into Lucci, for example, being able to remove those Sabos is excellent. Overall, I'm not sure this is going to be a top meta deck, but I think it's definitely a lot more interesting than it's been for a while. And especially with most of the old Navy cards rotating, this is probably the best way to build this deck that we have going forwards. Yep, that's right, more Luffy. Purple-black Luffy this time. Now, this is another deck that I've not yet had an opportunity to test myself, but a bit of a purple-black Luffy enthusiast, among other things. Krolzor, another great YouTuber. This is from one of his most recent videos. I have made one change. He had Mama Ragen in place of the 10-cost Dofi. But again, this deck just gets access to the same things, right? You get the Pirate Docking 6 for more consistency in the mid-game, and you get the 8-cost Nami, which in this deck can resummon Beer Luffy. Now, your Beer Luffy obviously doesn't stack with himself, and also doesn't stack with Zombie Luffy, the 7-cost, but the fact that your Beer Luffy is so vulnerable to removal, traditionally, and now you have a way to just bring it back straight away, if it is taken out, is going to be really nice for your defense in this deck. The reason I've added the 10-cost Dofi is I think into Enel, being able to stun 3 of their Enels, even just for 1 turn, can just be game-winning, right? That extra aggression that you get out of, and it allows you to just pump face and not worry about it, I think could be pretty strong. Obviously, this card's not searchable, and you do have to be careful with the Don minus. If you use the Don -3 from the Dofi, you're going to get 2 back. But then if you Beer Luffy, you are going down to 7. And then if you Gum Gum Giant on top of that, you're going down to 5. Of course, that can be offset by Black Moria, but now with the diving through the 15 different layers of Don D-Ramp and Re-Ramp. So be careful with your Don D-Ramp, but I think Purple Black Luffy is at least worth another shot in this format. Now, BY Luffy has also gained a few new things. Out of OP15, the main card is the 5-cost Luffy. This rush effect, combined with the anti-event and blocker technology, is really nice and gives you another nice aggressive tool for this deck's arsenal. In addition, the mill options, both from the 2k Sanji and the 2-cost Chopper, give this deck a lot more consistency in just seeing its pieces, right? So one of the things that could sometimes be a little tricky is if you didn't get your guys in the trash, you couldn't find them, right? You had the Garp and you had the event, but actually just milling 5 it makes this deck feel a lot more consistent at seeing the combos that you need. In addition, we have access to just Borsalino for healing and the 8-cost Nami, which can resummon 7-cost Robin for, again, just healing. So if you're not quite ready to become a 7k leader, you could certainly just play out a Nami Robin combo, heal with your leader effect, of course, first, and then heal with the Robin. You're going to go back from 0 to 3, which is kind of nuts. And then you get to rush with the Robin, and they're not going to want to take that out because of the nasty on KO. Again, I'm not sure if Black Yellow Luffy is going to be a real meta threat, but I think he's definitely at least worth revisiting with all these new additions. Now, Black Lucci. I enjoyed playing this deck back in the day, man. This deck's fun. This deck is still fun, and this deck's gained a couple new cards from this set. Primarily, it's just this new build they want you to go into with this new 4-cost Lucci. He gets bigger for how many more cards in your trash. He can draw you a card on play if you are willing to sack off one of you guys. But the biggest downside for me is we don't have Spandam anymore, and we don't have Air Door. Like, Air Door was kind of funny. I don't think you needed that card for this deck. Spandam felt so good. Being able to use it just to get extra search towards your Lucci, and then use your Lucci to kill the Spandam and draw a card. The combo was there. Without Spandam, I think this deck is really going to be quite poor. It was already inconsistent, and I think it's now going to be even more inconsistent. However, it is worth noting we have gained access to this, the 7-cost Luffy that you can see in this list here, as well as a couple of other cards. Maybe if you can go to 7 on defense, it'll help with your defense. And combining that with like little bits of spot removal and bunch of chump blockers could be an option. But I'm not convinced that this is going to be very good at all, unfortunately. Now, as we move into yellow, let's start with Black Yellow Moria. When I first played this deck, it felt really bad. After watching a few more people try it out, I sort of saw what they were going for. It still felt pretty bad, I'm not going to lie. Felt like you just didn't have enough resources, and if your opponent was a good player, they could play around what you were trying to do way too easily for my liking. However, we've gained the man, the myth, the legend, the 1-cost Hogback. This card, the fact that this just draws you a card on KO is so good, man. It's such a cheap unit that you can just kill. Just kill him. He gets you mills to increase your consistency, which is what we were doing playing Sindri anyway. But he also just gets you a card. And I think there is room maybe to even build a stage version of this deck where you use the stage to bring back the Hogback every turn. But my one concern with that strategy is milling out, unironically. So I've not gone with that just yet, but I have included a couple of copies of the 4-cost Perona, who you can summon off your triggers, be a blocker, and then she can bring back the Hogback if there are the requisite number of cards in your trash. And in addition to that, we've also gained the Zoro. And the Zoro is pretty cool because not only can you play it off of the Moria's trigger, because he can play any 4-cost, but you can also play it off of the 6-cost Moria. The 6-cost Moria doesn't only summon Thriller Barks, it summons any 4-cost. You just have to be Thriller Bark. So on your 6th on turn, you can play this 6-7 Moria, put a Don your leader, and resummon Zoro and heal for 1 card. Seems kind of crazy, I don't know. I think this is a pretty interesting card. I think there will also be builds that opt for more Borsalinos and Rayquazars, maybe even with Hiyori, as opposed to Hancock and the Brickbat. But after playing into enough Morias and Boas last format, I don't know, I can't bring myself to cut the 9-cost Hancock. That card's so crazy, man. That card is crazy, but it might not be optimal anymore. I think Moria is going to have a lot more resources now, which is going to make him, honestly, a lot scarier. Now, as we move into true yellow slop territory, this is the sort of the last bastion before we just see Borsa Rayquaza in every deck. I go Kalgara. This is a fun aggro yellow deck that doesn't really play into triggers that much because you take your own life. As a result, we play a fair amount of counter events. In fact, 3 counter events is sort of on the very low end. You're usually between sort of 3 and 5. And this deck has gained a bunch of new support in the set. The 3-cost Kalgara increasing your consistency. The 5-cost Wiper just being incredible at everything. Gives you power down, it gives you a dot on your leader every turn, which you really need. This card is just absolutely perfect for this deck. And he finally got an SR. Only, what, 7 sets late? Insane. The 5-cost Luffy is also a nice little rush closer. And there are a couple other options that are in this set that I've not put in this list, but you could certainly experiment with. In addition, we gain back Kingdom Come, of course, which Kalgara doesn't... I wouldn't say he's excited to sit at 1. But he certainly can. You're fairly happy to. And you can even go Kingdom Come plus 4-cost Zoro if you really want to just develop a guy, heal back to 2, and still get the removal. I think having access to this Kingdom Come card is just going to be very, very good. And Kalgara's aggression combined with that removal for top end, I think gives him a lot of merit as we look forwards. Now, we're not going to dwell on Enel because I've made a full video on him very recently. Check out that if you do want to see some Enel gameplay. This is the list that I was playing in the video. I've changed a couple cards. I've gone up to 4 of the Wiper because I was very impressed with him. And I've swapped the Frankie 2K over to Flompe because I think as more people get experienced with Enel, if they're a deck that suffers into Rego, they're going to just starve you. So having Flompe to draw your own life so that your Kingdom Come is less painful, I think is going to be important. Now, probably the most rogue yellow deck on this list is Mr. Vegapunk. He's never quite been top tier. He's been tier 2 a couple of times. He's been rogue a lot of the time, but you gain some lovely new tools in this set. Having Rego back to give you removal for top end is brilliant, because there are certain top end, like especially 9-cost Zoro, that kind of brutalize this deck. And in addition to this deck has the best access by and far to the Borsalino Rayquaza combo. Because you're great at searching out Borsalino with your Egghead Searcher, and you're also able to just put the Rayquaza in life with leader effect. Everyone else has got to jump through hoops or hope to get lucky. Mr. Vegapunk just goes, let's put it there. Rayquaza. Do you want to attack? Do you want to attack, Bucker? And then you get the heal. It's just it's such a disgusting combo. Anyway, the Borsalino and also the new Lilith from Evo 3 give you more resources with this deck, which is something you've traditionally struggled with. But with this amount of extra card draw, combined with pretty free big removal, and the 9-cost Bonney to help you go for lethal, I think Vegapunk has a lot of potential in this format. Now, a deck that I think a lot of people thought might get hit harder is Blue-Yellow Boa, but she did lose Pudding. Losing Pudding is going to make your lethals a lot harder, but we can't forget how disgusting the Borsalino Rayquaza combo is in this deck in particular, where you're rewarded for your triggers. I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent here, and as to why this combo is so good. In the past, one of the most annoying triggers for your opponent to get last life was the 0-cost, right? The 0-cost, you had to activate the trigger, so you lose that card that would otherwise go to your hand. You had to toss one card from your hand, and for that cost, you got 1 life. So you went -1, right? You paid 2 cards, and you got 1 back. And sure, you got the extra benefit of a life as well on top of that. However, that had to be your last life as well. If this was the second to last life, it did nothing. Now, Rayquaza is just always live. Firstly, if it's in the bottom 3 of your lives, it's live, which is incredible. And in addition, the trigger is just so much better. As long as you have that Borsalino in your trash, when you flip this, you don't have to trash a card to get the Borsalino back. So you're only paying 1 card, right? You're paying the Rayquaza. For that cost, you get a body, which is effectively just getting to play a free card, like a Kikunojo trigger, and then you get a heal. So you go +1. And in Boa, you then draw a card. So you go +2 off this trigger. Disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. And then if that life that you healed is another trigger, then you draw another card, and it just... it snowballs, man. This combo is so stupid, and I think they really should have hit it. And I think they will in the future. But here's a bow list you can try if you do want to take advantage of this. Although I would say be a little bit careful because there's a lot of blue yellow Nami about, and that matchup is pretty bad for Boa, especially with losing Pudding. I think Femur is going to be more important. You saw people cutting this to 1. I think you're going to need at least 2 now, in my opinion, because raw Pudding lethals are going to be a lot harder. So maybe you'll even need double Femur lethals. We'll see. And speaking of Nami, there's still 2 schools of thought with Nami, but having lost Pudding, concerning, but I actually think the Thriller Bark build might be better now. I think being able to just spam healing is really useful, and the Perona's on play, being able to stun the Enels, I think is also going to be very, very good. There are, in my eyes, clear answers to Nami now that she doesn't have a Red Rock. 9-cost Zoro is a good one. If you want to jam that in your green deck, you then have just a massive 3 swings that Nami's not going to love defending. However, I don't think it's like an instant win button, even at that, because they do play the 10-cost Whitebeard, which can happily block a couple of swings. And the amount of healing this deck puts out is just crazy. This is actually the exact list that Kazuki played at last weekend's 3v3 to win the whole tournament out in Japan. It was huge 3v3 CS, and it didn't even play Pudding. So that's why I'm saying I think Thriller Bark might be the move, because you don't actually lose anything. He wasn't playing Pudding, he wasn't playing Red Rock. Kind of crazy. However, if you don't like Thriller Bark, I do have an alternative, and this was again another list from that 3v3. This one was actually played by Tony, and they came second at the end of the tournament. And one notable thing about this list is there are no girls in this deck. I think because he's leaning so heavily into the Nugates with a full 4 copies, he's saying, right, well, if I'm playing the Nugate, I'm going to have a Don anyway. And if not, every other turn, you can pretty much have a Don in your leader regardless. The 5-cost Nami puts a Don there, and then once you get to 8 and above, whatever you're doing, you're probably going to have time to put a Don in your leader. And the 2-cost girl does go -1 in hand, and Enel can also deal with it very, very easily. So I can see what he's going for here. This list did have 3 Puddings. I've taken those out. I've added in an extra 2k, and I've added in 2 copies of this unblockable Sanji. So I think it's actually pretty cool in the deck. Being a cheap blocker and giving unblockable to a character is far better than the Ace event they played in the past. And don't forget, because Nami is so generic, there's a lot of room to be experimental with this deck. You could include maybe even the 10-cost Luffy from the new set. Maybe you could get down more of a Straw Hat package. I've seen people playing more Sky Island focused Nami builds. So I think there's a bunch of different ways you can go with this deck. But the new additions from the new set in the Zoro and Stupid Borsalino combo, as well as potentially the Sanji, I think are exciting enough. Now finally, a deck that I wasn't planning to cover until this week's 3v3. One of the runners-up from this tournament, Hassa, was playing purple-blue Luffy, blue-purple Luffy, excuse me, without Red Rock and without Mihawk. I don't know if he was trying to test for post-rotation or something, because that seemed kind of strange to me. And there was 1 Pudding in this list. I've just changed that out for an extra 2k. But yeah, he's gone to more of a Don Quixote build, with bringing back the Dofi and the Rosie that we saw in the past, and then being able to use the Pentachromatic String for extra ramp options, as well as a big counter event. And so, an interesting card here, Whitesnake. So what Whitesnake does is it buffs your leader by 1,000. Buffing yourself just to 7 is pretty strong. Enel likes to swing sort of 6/6, 6 with the weenie, and then 6 with leader, because they get that 1 active Don back from leader effect. So that nullifies that whilst drawing a card to dig you further through your deck. But also if you've played a Roger, and then either you just leave 2 Don up if you're a raw Roger, if you've already got a Rosie on the board and then you go Sanji Roger, well then you can go to 9k. Which is kind of gross. That's kind of gross. And it also gives you good access to Slow Beam Sword off the Rosie Dons, as well as of course Giant. It's interesting to see this more event heavy focus build come back with a couple of new additions, and and with this build being so cool, I absolutely had to highlight this in this video. I love this deck. I'm really glad that he's maybe not dead, because I didn't have high hopes, but I don't know, Hassa's inspired me. So thank you for watching. That was a lot of lists. If you've made it all the way to the end, I appreciate you. If you've got a list for your favourite rogue deck that I didn't mention and you think it's been buffed significantly from this set, do let me know in the comments. And if you disagree with any of the lists and you think yours are better, again, let me know. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy OP15 pre-release when it comes, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.